You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you would find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camel for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good tasting a cigarette can be.
All right, I gotta reiterate, I'm not promoting smoking at all, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I had somebody in the church a while back when I spoke, like, you aren't promoting the smoking of cigarettes, right? No, matter of fact, quite the opposite. All right, here's the other one that I wanted to show you guys. This might hurt some people's feelings.
Work so hard, and we go. And let's go around back where we can't see him. Gee, we're gonna do something, Fred. Okay? How's about taking a nap? Look at the bitter right there. Let's take a Winston break. Yeah, Winston is the one for cigarette that delivers flavor 20 times a pack. Winston's got that good to flame. Yeah, Fred.
All right, so I did want to make sure you guys saw the videos. Again, 50 years ago, here we are now, and what do we think of smoking? And isn't it interesting what time has done? Let me run on real quick to the rest of what I'm trying to do here. Oh, that was, I wanted to show you guys that too, but I'm running out of time. Let's break it down. I do want to say, you know what? It's real encouraging to see a church like this with the mix of black, white, Hispanic. It's awesome. I was telling some gentlemen here, one of the wives earlier was, there's two things that we really try to push here in creation. Is one, I want to encourage everybody, you can do whatever you want to do. You guys have the tools to do it. Don't let anybody say that you're not intelligent enough to do X, Y, and Z. And number two, don't let the onion, the layer of onion, which is race, create a hindrance to what you want to do or the friends you want to have or that kind of thing. My personal story is a little bit. I was sitting there talking with the families. My sisters got pregnant when they were like 14 and 15, and I'm 9 years younger than them, so I was about 6. And their boyfriends were Latino, and I didn't have a father at home, so the Trujillos and the Gomez's took me in, and I was a little white kid running around in a big old Mexican family. And I was on a boxing team. All our fights, I grew up in Wyoming, so all our fights were on the reservation. And imagine the bright white kid and all the Latinos and then all the Native Americans. And who do you think won the fight? The white kid? Everybody. So anyway, that served me well just in life. But real quick, you guys remember I told you we were in South Africa, and I found this video today. This is my wife and my son. He was like 1 at the time. This is Jane Goodall's chimp Eden. And so they have the wiring up, and some of these chimps you can't see. They have some of them had missing fingers and limbs and stuff. This was 9 years ago. And this is the very day that I met Jane Goodall. And there was another clip where I was filming as we were walking by, like, that's Jane. And then I was like, babe, take phone. She's like, no. And I'm like, hey, Jane. I had that video on here. It was really funny, but I wanted to make sure you guys saw a little video of, this is actually Chimp Eden. It's a very large chimp enclosure. It's really cool. All right, where was I at? Okay, it was right after her. All right. So basically, the theme of my talk is basically the things in life that I've experienced and seen, and basically, said, hey, creation is real. This is why it's real. These are the questions I asked. Anybody hear of this? It's called the Antikythera device. Anybody raise your hands if you've heard of it? Okay, Terrence, my guy. Man, say? Say it. No, your buddy next to you was about to sell you out. My wife's a nerd. That's cool. She makes 3 times more than I'll ever make. Nerds win. All right, so the Antikythera, this is really interesting. It's something. This thing was found back in like 1899 or 1900, 1902, something like that. And it's named after an island over in Greece. Antikythera is the name of the island, right? So they had a bunch of divers going down, and they found some stuff. They found pottery. They found this, that, and the other. This is one of the amazing things they found, and over the years they found additional parts to it. But it's a device, like this is what you can see, it's encrusted in, and you do an x-ray, and the bottom line is about this big. So with the picture you're seeing, it's about that big. But what's interesting is when they look into this device, they see all these, like a watchmaker would make, cranks and shafts and teeth. What's that? Hip components, yeah. And of course that was Terrence, by the way. Everybody know the nerd said that. So the point being is they've dated this thing, and based on the shipwreck and some other dating methods, this thing dates back to before the time of Jesus, about 100, maybe 200 BC, right? So this is why this is kind of freaky, is because they didn't have the tools, the know-how to make these kind of components until 1700s, maybe even 1750s. So what is a device like this doing running around 200 years before Jesus was walking, right? So this is what we call an out-of-place artifact. And when you look into out-of-place artifacts, there's actually quite a few of them. All right? And this is interesting for you guys that aren't nerds and are nerds to look into this for yourself. He's cool. I'll just try to talk over. Have some fun. So these are some of the components that they continue to find over the years, and again, about this big. But over the years, they're trying to figure out, what is this? And a recreation of the device is something like this. And what they think they figured out is it's some kind of device that looks at the stars to navigate the seaways. All right. The interesting thing, though, again, I want to come back to, we supposedly did not have the tools to create this kind of device, this metalwork, except 1700s, right? So when you research more of these things called out-of-place artifacts, you start looking into what we categorize this as the intelligence of ancient men. Where did the intelligence come from, the know-how, the ability to create things 200 years before Jesus? But you're taught in school, hey, we didn't create this stuff till, the Renaissance. People were actually smart. No, I will tell you that there's a lot of evidence to let you know that people were much smarter than we give them credit for, and some might even say smarter than we are now. Metallurgy in the Bible. So there's in the book of Job, there's one, but I like the one Deuteronomy 8:9. Canaan is described as a land whose rocks are iron and from whose hills you can mine copper. Right here, it's where they talk about professions of different people, herdsmen, musicians, metalworkers. Well, now we're looking at evidence in these books that maybe there were metalworkers back in 200 BC, maybe even back before that. That's crazy. That flies in the face of everything I'm taught in school. So I'm gonna walk away from the Antikythera and let you guys kind of look more into that. The idea is this: why is there stuff out there? And I'm taught in school that we can't work with metal till the 1700s. Really, we got some Bronze Age swords running around back in the day, but nothing to the level of the Antikythera. So then you start looking around, and hey, look, my Latino people, scream loud. We got some South American stuff here. I'm going to show it here. Oh, that was weak. I heard that. So all over the world, the point is, I don't care what color, culture, creed, we got this stuff all over the world. And what we're talking about here is megalithic sites, right? Another separate subject that taught me in my years of, creation versus evolution. So, Ola Tatemo, all right, I don't know who's familiar with this, but we're talking about massive rock structures and how they were caught. And this is in South America, right? I just want to show these real quick because I want to get to the really cool stuff. But a lot of people they're not sure how they cut. Some of these rocks are like 8 tons, right? And they're like, man, did they have diamond cutting tools back in the day? How did they do it? Because basically, I'm going to shortcut and tell you there's no way that you do this with bronze instruments and chipping away at it. Not possible. I can sit here and tell you guys some theories. I don't really want to go down that road. I just want to say there's a lot of junk out there that you guys aren't really showing in school. That there's the intelligence of ancient men. So the bottom line is, where does that intelligence come from? So let me sum it up. You got Adam and Eve. God said, hey, look, dude, name everything, build everything, do everything, you're really smart. There's your intelligence. So what we see in front of our eyes in terms of the geological and biological and metallurgy and different parts and aspects of what we live in the world that we live in, you see that people were way, way smarter back in the day. Where did that intelligence come from? So now, yeah, that's really cool. Again, you're look at these cuts that they would make. My pointer just went up. Look at the cuts. You know, they make now, what they say is this is good for dealing with earthquakes. You put a bunch of building blocks together in a certain way, and the earthquakes hit, this thing ain't going to move. But how are they making cuts like this? And then Saxe Huan, this is awesome, totally awesome. I wish I could make my way and see this personally. This entire structure here, it's 3 levels, but here's a close-up of how big some of these are. How do they build these? How do they cut them? How do they move them? How do they whatever? You know, now I'll tell you one theory. A lot of people, I'll just tell you one. A lot of people think, oh, they have some way of cutting this. Well, another one out there is it's basically a polymer cement that they've created, and they use forms. So anybody work cement here, construction? Anybody? Raise your hand. I got 2 gentlemen here. You know what I'm talking about with forms then? So basically what they're saying is they wanted to create a structure that was solid against earthquakes. So they have a form in these different ways, and they could restructure that form like you would cement. And they created a polymer, right? And there's some studies out there that the Russians have done. They did some studies on the substances, and like, yeah, this isn't like a normal rock structure. It looks like somebody out here grinding up some cement for a road. That's a possibility. But what's interesting is nobody really knows how they cut, made, moved, any of this stuff. And this stuff is pre-Incan. The Incans came along, and they built over on top of these structures that were already there. A lot of cool stuff. All right, so now coming back, this is where I'm from in Wyoming. This is an old volcano core, and in this area, my mom, man, she's like, I'm a little kid, I have to go with her. She pull off on an old dirt road and just walk away. I'm like, Mom, what you doing? She comes back 2 hours later, and walk in these areas with a handful of these arrowheads. It was really cool now, but back then it was terrible. So the reason why I bring this up is I just showed you the Antikythera device, right? These Native American arrowheads, we're talking, when did the horses, anybody know history, when did the horses first appear from the conquistadors that came into southern Mexico and central Mexico? Those horses started breeding coming up north, and now you got the Middle American, Native Americans, they're running around with horses about what? 1525, somewhere in there, right? So these Native Americans are shooting things with arrows like this. I just showed you something that was almost 2,000 years older in metalworking, right? Did these Native Americans come from a different ape? No. Remember what I said to you guys yesterday was that we're all related, right? So now there's a whole other area that I could go in this in terms of land mass moving, Tower Battle, different people groups, and now we're talking about technology and intelligence that has been lost over the ages, right? So keep your perspective. This Roman bridge right here in Ponte Fabricio in Rome, that was built in 62 BC, before Jesus was walking around. That's still used today. Cars ride on it. What in the world did the Romans do 2,000 years ago? Now remember, Romans, we all know a little bit about Roman history. They had swords, shields, that dominated the world for a while. This is 1,500 years before Indians in the Native Americas, Native Americans running around on horses. We're, as a people group, genealogically and based on DNA, we're all related. It's just the separation of that knowledge and when. So now I'm trying to get you guys to think, well, dang. So look at like the aqueducts from Rome. They're still up. This is in France. Some of these Roman clowns built 2,000 years ago. It's still up. Why? How in the world? Some of the Colosseums, this one's in Croatia, it's used for concert venues now, but that thing is still up, man. Those Romans did some good work. So what I found out, and this is just in recent years, a lot of boring talk, thanks, Bruce. A lot of boring text, I get it. At the end of the day, I'll tell you this. The Romans' secret was they mixed volcanic ash in their concrete mix. And in that volcanic ash, what would happen is, especially salt water, but any kind of water, all the different flavors of water, regular water, it would crystallize and make it harder. But salt and salt water would make it even more dense and harder. So over the years, that cement got better. I don't don't know about you guys here, but in Indianapolis, we got this interstate, 465 goes around the city, what's called Circle City. They rebuild that parts of that every 5 years, man. What are they doing wrong? The DOT, right? What in the world are they not, listening to Roman history, right? So this is another problem I have as I'm studying, like, man, I'm finding genius of ancient man. What am I missing? Now, personal story. I'm going to take you out to southern Africa, and when I lived in Swaziland, I got a chance to go over to a place called Iguana Bay. Look it up, one of the top 10 areas to scuba dive, and I started learning about the coelacanth fish. Some nerds going to tell me. All right, we'll go back in a minute. The coelacanth. So are you serious? Is it coelacanth? All right. That's an awesome example of a guy that swam with him but doesn't know the name. And we're in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. This dude tells you the name. So, at the front right here is a sign. It's a national park, so you can't stay after 5. So you go in there, and they got this big sign that says, home of the coelacanth fish. So I started scuba. The long story short is they thought this thing was, the last one was about 42 billion years ago. Now it's called a living fossil. And I want to bring something up Bruce said a long time ago that I now incorporate with my talk that I like a lot. So basically, I'm sitting there, biologists, nerds, and whatever, come on, why are you guys here? Like, oh, we're here to swim with the lowest, what? Coelacanth. I'll be coming back to you, a few times during the talk. Thank you. Coelacanth. I'm like, the what? And so they started explaining at the end of the day, this thing was rediscovered in 1938 after being gone for 42 million years. All right, and so now that's actually me swimming there, scuba diving in Iguana Bay. And so, yeah, let's watch this real quick. Don't worry, it brightens up. Oh, thank you.
Once known only from fossils, the coelacanth was thought to have gone extinct around 65 million years ago in the late Cretaceous, during the great extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs. And yet, in 1938, one was found off the coast of South Africa alive. A fish almost entirely unchanged since the days of dinosaurs. This discovery represented one of the most significant natural history discoveries of recent times. Living at depths of around 200 meters down in the twilight zone of the ocean, they are found around the steep rocky slopes of volcanic islands, venturing forth from their lava rock caves at night to feed. Being passive drift feeders, they move slow and feed on cephalopods as well as smaller fish.
Okay, this guy's going to kill me, but you get the idea. So, did you hear he said almost unchanged in 65 minutes? Almost, no, not completely unchanged in 65 minutes. I hate how they try to throw that stuff in there. What do you mean almost unchanged? So, the interesting thing about the coelacanth, I'm still coming back to you. All right. So here's what's interesting is that this was pushed out to be the missing link between ocean dwelling and land dwelling animals. Why? Because if you look at the fins, they got bones in them, right? And so everybody's like, oh, look, that's what turns into animals because it walks up on the shore and then it turns into legs and then it turns into human beings and blah blah blah. But it's funny because here it is, it's live. And now Bruce and I were talking one time, and he goes, you know what you should point out? And one of the more important points is that there is really no, of the 42 million years between or 65 million, sorry, I mentioned 65 million years. There is no step between the 65 million and the one we see in the fossil record. Right? Basically, there's this big gap, 65 million years. We don't have a. So I remember talking to some of these biologists about it. I'm like, hey, I simply asked, why is this thing floating around if it's supposed to be extinct 65 million years? Like, does that mean there's other things out there? And of course, yeah, I'm on the beach at Iguana Bay, and we're talking about living fossils. So people look up living fossils. This is not the only one. My point being is, and Bruce was talking about the fossil record yesterday. There's a lot of these things that are found. Like, wait a minute, this is still around. What's the big one? Is it the sturgeon? But I'm thinking of the crab. What's that crab? Horseshoe crab. For a time, I was like, oh, this thing's extinct. about more about. I'm going to skip this one. That's a good one. All right, let's get to this. Poodles. Anybody own a poodle? All right, there's about to be a fight parking lot, I think. So we got to look. All right, so the reason why I mention that is because I'm going to talk now. I'm going to jump into my last subject of genetics. DNA. So when we lived in Swaziland, this is called a burbu. It's a dog that was bred to hunt lions. And I couldn't find a picture of one that we had two. We had Thumper and Bully. Thumper was the boy, and he was Thumper 2.0. I had another full-bred dog in Wyoming. It was a sheepdog, full-bred English sheepdog named Thumper. He's also important. So these dogs are incredibly muscular, dense. Their bones are heavy, heavy dogs. They're used as guard dogs, and they don't hunt lions anymore with them, but that's what they originally bred for. Anybody in here breed anything? Horses, dogs, cats, rats. I say cats and rats, you're laughing. What was the name of the pastor? Last night, the dude I was talking to him and his daughter, Dietrich, he came up to me and he started talking about how he used to breed cats. Some kind of a exotic feline. And his daughter used to breed rats. So you busted. I saw you laughing right there. So what's important about that, though, is if you understand how genetics work when you're trying to breed things, right? So I had these two dogs. Anybody here? Anybody a dog owner? Raise your hand. All right, good. This should resonate. Does anybody? Do all you people that raise your hand, do you own mutts or are they full bred? Raise your hand if it's a full bred. All right, raise your hand if it's a mutt. All right, you guys are full breds. Do you say that you spend a little bit more money keeping that thing alive than the guy with the mutt? You're like, I don't know. The short answer is yes. Full breds die sooner, they have hip problems and skeletal issues. And now the reason why I want to talk, let me come back here. Poodles. These things are the most worthless animals on the planet. Alright, and here's why. Their fur never stops growing. Like I have a husky right now. That thing sheds twice a year. Right? But poodles keep growing. Hair. Keeps going. And they have to continue to get shaved. They don't, they get infection in their eyes and their ears and they die. Right? Dude, I could put about 30 or 40 problems with poodles. They lose teeth early, they got all these other problems. Why? Because they were bred that way. Right? Let's get back real quick to the burbu. I had this guy Thumper, right? And what happens is in Southern Africa we have tick-bite fever a lot. You can get it, animals get it. The problem is with my dog Thumper, if you don't get to him soon enough and get a shot for that tick-bite fever, virus, bacteria, whatever, it jumps the blood-brain barrier on full-bred dogs and kills them. But you have these ruddy Swazi dogs running around. They're ugly, they're mangy, whatever. They got ticks hanging off them, just sucking blood by the pound. You know? So what's the difference? So I'm living in Southern Africa, and my dog dies. I didn't get to him quick enough. I didn't get to the vet quick enough to get him. I'm like, man, what? These things hunt lions. What are you talking about? Well, they're bred. What happened was, Bruce touched on this yesterday. You guys remember, let's talk about the gray wolf. You can breed from a gray wolf down to a stupid poodle. But you can't go back, right? But what's interesting is you can get down. How do they get to that? Well, somebody with a gray wolf's like, I got this idea for a stupid poodle. I don't know what it looks like, but here's how I'm going to breed. I'm going to breed out these colors. I'm going to breed this out and this out. I'm going to get down to this fluffy little teacup poodle, right? What happens is when you breed those things out, you breed out defensive mechanisms. You breed out things that help you survive. And Bruce said it perfectly. He cheated. He took the topic. But he was basically saying these things are worthless. They can't survive on their own unless you're willing to spend billions of dollars and take them to the vet all the time, right? So let's think about that. Let's continue to think about the genetic side of this. Now, I'm going to show you this. This is a real simple skin color chart, all right? So if you're big A and big B up there, and you're a husband and a wife and married, fall in love, have kids, that's what you're going to produce, right? There's no change in that. There's no variety in your DNA. If you come down to the little a, little b, and all white, that's all you can produce. But if you're somewhere up on the right hand or the left hand, bottom left hand corner, upper right, you can produce all those colors. You can get it anytime. I mean, I see a bunch of kids right here. It's like you never know what you're going to get, right? Every parent can attest to this. We had a kid that looks like my mom. We had a kid that looks like my dad. We had a kid that, what in the world? Looks like grandma. This is genetics. gets a little more variety. Anybody know who the tall white guy is? Michael Winslow? Nice. No, who said Robert Wadlow? You're a nerd, dude. Terrence? Nerd. Freaking geek. That's right. That's right. This dude, what, is almost 9 feet. 9 feet. Now, if you know who Shaquille O'Neal is, Shaquille O'Neal is like nothing next to Robert Wadlow. All right, here's some more pictures. Yao Ming, Shaquille O'Neal, and Kevin Hart. Right? And now listen, you guys, there's always an assumption like, man, you go to China, everybody's going to be 2'1". Yeah, Yao Ming kind of blows that out the water. Now, the one on the right, that's pretty funny. Pastor Boyd likes this one. Does anybody know who the tall black dude is? Don't ever call Terrence a nerd again, you hypocrite. So Wilt Chamberlain, right? Wilt the still, who's the guy in the middle? Finally, people know. I mean, I've been to some churches, everybody's like, I don't know who that is. What? All right, the guy on the right? Andre the Giant. DNA variety, crazy stuff. How does this happen? There's Shaquille O'Neal. Anybody know this little girl? Simone Biles. I got a funny story. My son was in gymnastics. One of his buddies, one of the older kids, Alec Yoder, just competed in the pommel horse for the Olympics this couple months and weeks back. Him and Simone Biles were kind of sweet back in the day. And Simone Biles, I'm not kidding, dude, she's like this tall. This tall. She's really nice, really nice. All right. Showing you a picture here. Anybody seen this young lady before? She's for real. Having two people. All right, let's watch this.
My part is when I'm talking to them, they'll finish their sentences. It's actually unbelievable. They both know what they're thinking and what they're going to say. And I think it's awesome. And it makes me smile every time I do it.
Alright, I won't go through the whole video. Anybody ever been in black and an all white area and felt like people were staring at you? Raise your hand. You ever had two heads? You ever been white on a continent of nothing but black people? Yes. Strange thing, you ain't been white on a continent of black people, Terrence. So, I share this a lot because, you know what? We all have issues. You ever been white on a Native American reservation with a bunch of Mexicans and everybody wanted to fight you? No, listen, we all have personal stories, right? And I guess maybe you see a girl with two heads, maybe your problems ain't that bad. I don't know, maybe you are. But this girl is actually living and real. And I say this girl, I'm talking two distinct personalities. So you're going to have some preaching, get some theology on me there and be like, two souls? Well, yeah. But how did this happen? Whatever. The point is, we're talking about, now this is obviously a mutation, right? And originally with the story, when she was born, they weren't sure. They were like, we got to separate one of the heads. And the parents were like, no, that's a viable life and a brain and everything. No, she wasn't supposed to live that long. I think she's an elementary school teacher in Iowa or something now. So again, DNA variety. Let me ask you kids, if you guys saw a skeleton of a two-headed baby that was dug up in Europe and somebody came out with a story, what would you think of that? Aliens. I don't know. I don't know. What would you think? It's kind of weird stuff, right? But it turns out she's real. Right? You live long enough, you're going to see some strange stuff, I'm telling you. And then I guess there's a whole other, pastors in here could probably teach a lot on character and integrity, like, kids don't stare at the two-headed girl next to you in class. She's human just like you. You know what I mean? You got to, and now, of course, things become normal over time. Of course, as the kids get to know Abby and her sister. All right, so let's get to some judges. This is me and two of my sons when they were younger. This was at God's Window in South Africa. So what we're focused on is the young one with his tongue sticking out. He's not permanently stuck like that. But let me tell you something about it. His name is Solomon. Solomon has sickle cell trait. Solomon is colorblind. Solomon has asthma, and Solomon has ingrown toenails. We actually took him through a procedure last week. He had to have both removed. Man, that doctor went to town on that bad boy, like just ripping it out. I should have filmed it. It was pretty cool. But we were sitting there, and this is why it's kind of funny. But we're sitting there, and the doctor comes in, and she goes, "Oh, you know this is hereditary. So who in the family's got it?" I'm like, "Oh, me. He got it from me." And because when I was playing sports in junior high and high school, I had ingrowns all the time, all the time. And Solomon gets them, and hopefully he'll grow out of them. Sickle cell, he got from his mother. Now he's not full sickle cell anemia. He's got sickle cell trait. All right. Here's what's interesting. He's born. And we live in Indianapolis, Marion County Health Department called us up and like, Mr. Liddy, we got to talk with you. And I'm like, baby, what's going on? She's like, oh, they're probably going to tell you that he's got sickle cell. I'm like, great, that's awesome. We know that's awesome. I'll tell you why in a minute. So we sit down and we go in, and I have to go because we have to sign some paperwork that says we understand your son has sickle cell. So she goes, Mr. Liddy, I just want to tell you that your son has sickle cell. I'm like, oh, praise God. And she just freaked out. She looked at me like, what? So, did you know? How many people in here know what sickle cell trait is and what it looks like? Raise your hands. All right. So basically, your blood cells are like crescent moons. So if you go to Africa and the malaria bug jumps on you, the crescent moon cell sloughs off the malaria bug. My wife has trait. He has trait. You know who they had to worry about getting malaria? The white guy. So I spent a lot of time in Maputo, Mozambique, Southern Africa, Swaziland. We made our way up into Zimbabwe, and a lot of areas with malaria. I was so happy I didn't have to worry about my wife and my son. Now what's interesting is the younger one there, Simeon, he did not catch the trait. Genetics, right? You never know what you're going to get. And here's Solomon with his beautiful hairdo. And Simeon a little older. This is recently. And then this is I don't know how long ago that was. So what I'm showing you, this is our third son, Silas. But what I'm showing you is genetics. You never know what you're going to get. We joke all the time about Solomon. He's a little darker. If he gets out, he'll get dark real quick. Simeon will get dark, but he's not quite as dark. He just had different skin. But he didn't get sickle cell trait. He didn't get asthma. We don't know about ingrown toenails. But we're talking about genetics and what you may or may not get. Now, here's where this mom dropping the bomb, and here's what's happening. If you guys aren't impressed, I want my money back. On the way out the door. All right, so I've talked about Adam and Eve, and basically at the end of the day, bottom line, they've mapped a lot of the human genome, and they're like, oh, dang it, we have to admit we're all related. So the argument now is how far back. I mean, we're all related to the same male-female pair. Christians are going nuts. Woo, Adam and Eve. So the atheists are like, nah, aliens dropped these people off like 160,000 years ago. All right, fine, cool, I don't care. Now you have to admit, after all the years of the junk you pumped in my head at school, now you got to admit that we're all related. So, atavism is the word. Here's a famous couple in England, Richard and Catherine Haworth. She's from northern Nigeria. She married this redheaded faced white dude. They had kids. They did not come out albino. That is a completely different. Instead of having a mixed skin color, she produced. Okay, now I want to come back to color blindness. You know who passes that trait? Who? Yeah, nerds. Both of you, nerds. That's the correct answer. The father. So the doctor comes in one day. He had an eye exam. Who's got color blindness? My wife had to say, "Oh, my dad." So it jumped a generation from the grandfather to my son. All right. So now. Skin color. That's a recessive trait passed by the mother. So the black woman produced the white kids. What? No. Yes. You go back far enough, and we're talking about generations, and this is where we talk about the gray wolf, right? The gray wolf has all these genes and traits that, like Bruce was saying, it's got windshield wipers on the headlights. Why? Right? Dumb things, whatever. But it's got all those choices. So now we got a lady in some town pulled the choice from way back and gave it to her kids. So when I moved to South Africa, or when I went to South Africa first, this is a massive story. Huge. Sandra Lane, she's still alive. She was black and born to white parents, and this is during apartheid. There was a huge court case because the reason why initially the husband was like, "You cheated on me," and she's like, "No, this is your child." So they went and had a genetic test and did some testing, blood testing, whatever. They found out, "No, this is your child." But the problem why I went to court was because, all right, legally, can a black person own white property when they die and all this other stuff, right? Went to court. Well, they had to prove that it was, in fact, their daughter. Here's an advertisement for a movie that's based on this.
I was unfaithful to my husband. There's black blood in our veins we never knew about.
Somehow, that's not wrong yet. We're the parents.
There's a plausible genetic explanation for Cyber's parents. Two white-looking parents can produce a child that's quite a lot darker than themselves. This phenomenon is commonly known as a throwback.
So I'll stop there because the movie's really about how she grew up in a white society and really couldn't handle it. She eloped with a Zulu dude and moved to Swaziland and lived there for a number of years. Her dad died, never saw him again, and then she saw her mother not too long before she died, but there's when she was a kid and before her mom died. It's a really good movie, but I don't know if you want to watch it. It's not exactly, it's a tearjerker, but this is genetics. Can you imagine back in the day before they had some way to test genes if something like this happened? Could you? I can't imagine the social issues, the pressure, probably suicide. At the end of the day, this is genetics being passed. And I think, I got this last slide here. This is another famous couple. They're twin sisters, right? Out of England. I talked to a lot of people and they've seen this picture before. It's amazing, isn't it? Twins, one comes out redheaded, pasty white, like, dang, ghost white. And then the other girl, right? And then they're walking around like, hey, we're twins. And everybody's like, you know, how do you explain that? Man, I mean, like, I don't have time to explain this to you. So, I'm going to end with that. The atavism thing, when I went to South Africa in 96 and learned about it, I sunk my teeth into this pretty deep. Because it's really cool. It's really easy to explain I love Bruce gets so my thunder with the whole dog thing. But he didn't cut on poodle, so I had that. So anyway, this is kind of my big one that I really, especially in today's age, with CRT and BLM and let's get everybody up and blah, blah, blah. Well, you see me in my wife's picture. We'll just let everybody be stupid. And when they kill themselves off, we'll take them. So I'm done. I don't know. Do I get 5 minutes of Q&A? Do we do it later? No, we do it later. I'm giving Bruce 5 minutes. All right, Bruce, come on up, man. Real quick as a plug while he's setting up. So this is a book that one of the guys that wrote one of these chapters is in our organization. Intelligence of Ancient Man, Genius of Ancient Man, has a lot of stuff and a lot more that we talked about in here. Young lady over here, raise your hand. Did you order the book off Amazon? Okay. This is the book, Evolution of Deployment Spirals and Forges. I've been using this forever. When I told you there is no missing link, that's all cited there. And then here's another book by John Morris the Younger. Thank you guys very much. Let Bruce run it.
Check this out. Yeah, I'm covered in that. I won't need that.
MO. My intro. Let's run that while he's getting set up. My intro to this. Take a minute. Okay, so while they're getting all of that set up, you guys have that clip back there and everything? Okay, just let us know when it's ready. It's ready now? Okay. Waiting for the... All right, so after the video, then we'll just go ahead and have Bruce come on up. And well, what was that? Is it a cold break? No, he said, do we have a cold break right now? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look at this, and then we'll take about a 5-minute cold break. Okay, just for Brother Juan, because Brother Juan didn't get here on time. Okay, all right. So
is God. El Olam, the everlasting God. Elohim Emet, the God of truth. El Shaddai, God Almighty. El HaKavod, the God of glory. El HaKadosh, the holy God. El Tzaddik, the righteous God. Elohim Chaim, the living God. Yehovah Chatov, the good Lord. Emmanuel, God with us. Amen. I am. In the beginning.
There is evidence.
There is evidence.
There is evidence.
There is
Scientific evidence.
deception exposed.
Five-minute Coke break. 5-minute break. All right. Well, Okay, at this time, we're going to have Brother Bruce Malone come. Let's give him a hand.
Hey. So, before I get started, David, wasn't he awesome? I mean, you've been at this for what, 2 years maybe? And I've been at this 30 years and you're already more fun to listen to than I am. I mean, this man is awesome. Anointed by God, thank you so much. That was just cool. Thank you, Lord. All right. So tonight, I'll just throw up the title right away. We're going to talk about the awe of God. I love that word, awe. And I think that's part of worship. That's kind of what God expects from us. When we ponder and think about what He's done for us personally and becoming a human being, it's really awe-inspiring. But we can't touch and see that stuff. We're going to feel it. And we can kind of know it intellectually, but that's the weakest of our the things that drive us is our intellect. More so is just the emotion and the awe. But what we can touch and see and feel and hear is what He's created. Okay? Now, all of us, I never speak in any church I've ever been to where I don't have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and people that don't even have kids. They come up to me and they're literally in agony as they describe how their kids no longer want to have anything to do with God. And they've brought them up through Christian churches, strong, fundamental churches, and they've had them in Sunday school every week. And they've taught them stuff at home, and they've had prayers at meal. And they've been surrounded by Christian truth, and yet by the time they're out of high school and college, God is irrelevant. And they have friends who are just mad at God, and they want to hear nothing about God and what He's done for them and who He is. And there's two things going on. One of them is life is just tough. We live in a fallen world full of fallen human beings, and at our hearts we are desperately wicked. Every single human being. And you just let it run its course, and people will turn into bitter, angry, selfish, arrogant people who start to use and abuse others, and we all get the brunt of that, and we're all unfortunately even part of pieces of that. So life can be nasty. And if you think the world is going on for millions and billions of years and God just made it that way, and God made people that way, then you kind of get mad at God. That's part of it. But the bigger piece, I think, is that for generations we have trained the awe of who God is and what He's made out of the kids of the next generation. Because everything is credited to it just made itself. Okay, now we're going to get to it at the last half of this lecture. We're going to talk about the bugs and the beasts and the birds and just these cool things. Now, I have 20 or more lectures, okay, and I have this video series where I put 18 of them into these 45 to 60-minute talks, filled with videos and illustrations and lots of really neat teachings. And for the most part, I talk about, where we came from, whether we evolved or we were created, and the evidence really does matter. We don't know who it matters to. Some people just need faith. But I'll guarantee you, if all you have is, well, the Bible says it, therefore I believe it, it must be true, that will work for you and maybe some folks in your generation. It's not going to work for the next generation. Because they're being trained the Bible's full of myths and it's irrelevant and it's wrong. So just pure faith isn't enough today because it's only going to work for you. So you got to talk about where did everything come from? And I'll explain why we can know things were created. Or I'll talk about the who. Who did the creating? And it's clearly someone outside of the box. If the box is the whole created universe and everything that we can see and touch and hear and feel, what's outside of that? What did it all? Jesus Himself is creator. Through Him, all things were created. That's what we're told. And in the beginning There was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then a few verses later, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. See, Jesus is creator, and he is God. He's that one of those ways God has revealed himself to us, a separate facet of the same entity. And I talk about when God created, and why radiometric dating gives the wrong dates, and why radiocarbon dating is misinterpretations, and why the assumptions are wrong in a vast majority of ways, like soft tissue from dinosaurs, blood cells, blood vessels, DNA being found inside of bones couldn't be there if they were buried for 60 million years. So we know the rock layers aren't that old. And that God tells us when creation happened and how God created. He literally spoke everything into existence. And it wasn't some natural process. It was supernatural. Now, creation does operate by natural means in 99.999999% of the time, so that we can know the way things happen now or the way they're going to happen the next day, and they're going to happen that way next week, and they're going to happen that way next month, and we can have confidence, we can understand the operation of creation. If every time we prayed something changed, you could never have confidence anything was going to be the same the next day. But there's specific events that God did, and he told us he did them. Creation, the entrance of death into creation, the worldwide flood, the miracles of Jesus in the Bible that were not natural processes. And when we check them out, we find out all the evidence supports these things really happened. But why does it matter? Why is it so important to believe in a biblical view of creation? Now, the people who believe in Islam believe in creation. Buddhists believe in some sort of creation. Hindus believe in some sort of creation. Atheists believe that evolution created. Many Christians are trained God used evolution to create. So there's all these varieties of belief in creation. But the Bible is very, very, very crystal clear that it was a recent supernatural event. Why does that matter? That's what we're going to dwell into. And we're going to spend most of our time in the second greatest, most impactful book of the Bible that deals with creation. Genesis is the first. I'm going to take you to the second one in tonight's talk. But before that, I want to tell you a story, because stories are powerful. And you need to enter into this story with me. Okay? I'm going to take you back 500 years to the Sistine Chapel. Now, imagine you are the child of Michelangelo. You're the young 6-year-old daughter, or the 10-year-old son, and your father is Michelangelo. Now, the Pope has told Michelangelo, one of the greatest, if not the greatest artist and sculptor of the day, if not all time, I want you to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, because I want this to be a magnificent work of art. And Michelangelo, he wanted to do sculpture later in his years, okay? He didn't want to spend his time painting. So he really tried to avoid it, but you can't avoid the Pope when he tells you to do something. You get excommunicated and all sorts of nasty things happen to you, so he agreed. He spent 3 years, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, 10, 12, 16 hours a day, laying on his back on a scaffold, painting the ceiling over him. You're his child. Dad, can we play ball today? No, I gotta paint the ceiling. Gotta get this done. Dad, just play frisbee. We used to play frisbee. No, I can't. I gotta paint the ceiling. And you watch this year after year. Historians say it ruined the greatest artist in history, his eyesight. By the time he's done, he couldn't hardly see. And he had to mix the paint with plaster. And it's actually a fresco where the paint is in the plaster so it lasts much longer. Magnificent work of art, okay? He painted scenes from the Bible. The central panel is the creation of man by God. As his finger reaches down to touch mankind being created. And then your dad dies. And you're kind of like irritated. So you have nothing to do with the Sistine Chapel. But 50 years later, you're getting old. And you want to go back and revisit what your father has created, the beauty and the magnificence, the majesty of it all. So you join a tour group that brings you into this beautiful cathedral of art. And as you're walking under it, the tour guide is saying, this room is nothing but miraculous. You see, it was just a plain ceiling, but then there was a leak in the roof, and water started to leak through it. It picked up minerals of different colors. And slowly, miraculously, all of these pictures started to appear on the ceiling of this building. And one picture appeared, and then another picture appeared. And over a matter of months and years, all of this beauty appeared by miraculous, supernatural, natural processes. It's miraculous. What would you think? And by the way, what do you think all the rest of the people in the tour group who don't know Michelangelo and have never heard of Michelangelo, are they going to have any appreciation of that man who created it all? None. Their awe of what Michelangelo has created is gone. And what are you going to feel as someone who knows the truth? What's the emotions you're going to have? Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Who cares? Well, that's his truth, but I have my truth. Is that going to be your attitude? Indignation. Absolute ire that someone would be so blatant as to hide the truth and pretend random processes created such beauty. You understand that's exactly what's happened in our educational system. And you understand how it destroys the awe of who really created it? That's why it matters. But it goes far beyond that. So now I'm going to just lay some background. I'm going to take you to the book of Job. Now, the book of Job, which I like to call the second greatest book on creation in the Bible. And most people don't even think of the book of Job as a book of creation. It is like historically and acknowledged by all Bible theologians, Bible nerds. By the way, I may be a nerd, but I'm probably not a Bible nerd. But the Bible nerds, they say it is the oldest book in the Bible. Now you say, oh, no, Genesis, it goes back to the beginning of creation. But it was penned by Moses about 3,400 years ago. The things in Job had to have been written more like 39 to 4,000 years ago. About the time of Abraham, before or after, in that general location. And by the way, Job lived about 200 or so years, and people about that time, about the time of Abraham, their lifespans had dropped to about 200 years. That's one of those many clues that it's that time period of history. Now, it contains these incredible scientific insights, some of them that were not even discovered or confirmed until the 1970s, okay? And yet they were written down 4,000 years earlier. But here's the biggie. This, like no other book in the Bible, addresses the issue of pain and suffering. Now, other than training the awe of God out of the people around us and our children, the other excuse, the other reason, you ask anybody why they don't want to have anything to do with God, why they don't believe the Bible, why they've walked away from a trust in a creator, they will say, because the world's so unfair, because there's all this death, all this unfair injustice, all the disease, young children and babies that die, natural disasters that kill thousands of innocent people. What kind of a God is that? And it is, it's true, that's the world we live in. So if we don't have a reasonable answer to that, why would people be interested in our religion? And that's the way it's viewed. Oh, it's just your faith, okay? This book addresses that, but in a very surprising way. And it provides the ultimate solution and the ultimate hope to those issues. So this subject tonight is a really important subject. Because like no other, it ministers personally. All of us are going to have problems in life. All of us are going to be offended in life. All of us are going to be treated unfairly in life to varying degrees, some way more so than others. So what do you do about it? Let me walk you through Job. And I'm sure many of you are well taught in this church, and you already know the story, but let me just walk you through it. See, Job was probably the richest probably the wisest, probably the most revered man in the ancient world. And there were not billions of people back there. There probably were only 1 million or less, a few hundreds of years after the flood. And they'd broken up, the sons had sons, and those sons had sons, and the sons and daughters had more sons and daughters. And they'd broken up into city kingdoms and little kingdoms, and they were starting to spread out across the earth. And the Middle East is the focus of the Bible. And in that area, it describes Job. It says, there was born unto him, Job, 7 sons and 3 daughters. How many children is that? 10. I'm going to come back to that because this is an important point later. And his substance, what he owed was 7,000 sheep. Now, this is early in Earth history. I think that's a lot of sheep. 3,000 camels. I mean, even today, a sheik that owns this kind of amount of stuff would be a very rich Middle Eastern kind of person. 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, she-asses, and a very great household, many, many, many people that he was providing for. He was the greatest of all men of the whole eastern area of the entire world. That's the man we're talking about. And he was also, in various parts of Job, it talks about, he was like the leader in his city. He was the one who people came to for wisdom. He was filled with compassion. He took care of the poor. He took care of foreigners. He was fair and kind and just. That's the man we're talking about. Okay? Well, go back up. We know the backstory. God allowed him to be tested. Was his faith based on just good things happening to him? Did he trust and believe in God just because he had a good life? That was the claim of Satan. Or did he trust God regardless of circumstance? So God allowed all of his wealth to be taken from him. Everything was stolen, everything died, all his houses died, collapsed in storms. Job knows God was in control of the weather. Then all of his children are murdered. All 10 children in the snap of a finger are gone. And then he comes down with probably the worst imaginable amount of pain in a disease that will not go away. His whole body, from the scalp of his head to the soles of his feet, are covered with oozing, bleeding sores that won't stop. They just hurt continuously and agonizingly 24 hours a day, and he scrapes himself with chunks of broken pottery to try to get some relief. And it goes on and on and on, and he gets silence from God. I can't even empathize with the agony this man is going through. And then he gets this advice, okay, first from his wife. She says, she says, curse God and die. I think this might be out of order. Hang on. Oh, yeah. And thus says his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thy integrity? Curse God and die. That's her advice. But he said unto her, thou speakest as a foolish woman speaks. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. And by the way, his previous statement was, naked I came out of my mother's tomb, naked I shall return. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In the midst of this agony, and he did not sin or charge God foolishly. So here's where we're at. And then I think the greatest test of all, the next 36 chapters of Scripture are this discussion between him and 3 friends, 3 associates. And the bottom line, what they're doing, they're trying to convince him that it is your actions and your works that bring salvation, that brings relief, that brings good things. Works mentality. That's the lie of Satan from the very beginning. And it's what's wrong with every single denomination that moves away from true Christianity. And it's the thing Paul fought against in all of his letters. The idea that we are part of earning our salvation before God. And if that is true, then Christ would not have had to die on the cross. You understand? It is a lie from Satan that he uses with such effectiveness because the pride of mankind wants us to be part of earning our salvation. And it always grabs root in that sinful heart. And we have to work to fight against it and understand God did it all. We did none of it. Okay? So he's faced with that temptation of saying, I must have sinned, and therefore bad things are happening. But he knew it wasn't true, and he didn't. All right. Now, before I get to the end of the story and then get into this awe of God, I want to walk you through some of the things that are in Job that aren't in anywhere else in the Bible, that are just stunning. First of all, there's a statement about space itself is just emptiness, okay? And this is Job 26:7. It says, He, that's God, stretcheth out the north over an empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. Now, every ancient culture, from the Greeks to the Hindu, the Indian area, to the Chinese, all of them had some account, even to the Greeks, that the earth was on the shoulders of Atlas, an enormous man, or it's the top of a tabletop sitting on a table, or it sits on a giant elephant, or some story like that. It wasn't until Newton came along in the 1700s that we realized gravity itself is holding things in place, and the earth literally is just floating on nothing. We're talking almost 3,800 years after God revealed it to us. Incredible scientific insight. In that book, it tells us that the universe is expanding and was expanded. It says, He alone spreads out the heavens. And by the way, there are, I believe, 13 different verses in Isaiah and Jeremiah and the Psalms where it says the heavens were stretched out like a curtain. The heavens were rolled out like a scroll. So it's very clear that in that first day of creation and maybe beyond, as God is creating time, space, energy, and matter, he's literally stretching out space itself and then creating the stars on day 4 in the midst of this template of space that he has stretched out. Well, it wasn't until 1927 that Hubble, using telescopes, proved with observation that things really are expanding. Einstein believed the universe was static. He actually cheated in the equations he had developed because he philosophically had been taught, the universe is a static place. It is what it is, and it's not changing other than winding down. So he added a fudge factor to his equations to try to make it look that way. He said it was the greatest mistake of his life, because he actually went to the observatory, observed the evidence, and realized, oh, wow, the heavens are expanding. Well, guess what? God told us that all along. Einstein finally reached the top of the mountain and saw the Bible sitting there, in essence. Always true in every statement it makes. The earth is rotating. This is Job 38. Thou hast commanded the morning since thy days. Since God started things, okay? That's what the implication here. We have had morning, afternoon, evening, morning, afternoon, evening. There is a continual rotation of the earth that brings morning back around. He's caused the day to spring. Day spring means the day springs up to know its place. The earth is turned as clay on a seal. See, when you make a pot, you put it on what looks like a seal, a round disc, and it spins. It turns. It's clearly stating the earth turns. Now, nobody knew that. All the way up into the Middle Ages, there were enormous resistance to the idea that the earth was not sitting there completely still and the whole universe and the sun was moving around it. A geocentric belief. And the astronomers that suggested otherwise were persecuted and ignored by the scientific consensus. See, don't ever believe something just because, we're told the majority believe it. 99.99% of people could say something the Bible's wrong, and it doesn't mean make it true. Truth is there whether it's acknowledged or not, and God says his word is true. This turned out to be absolutely true. There are springs in the ocean. Hast thou entered the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in search of the depth? Wasn't until the 1940s, that we sent submarines deep enough in the ocean that we saw these huge geothermal vents spewing millions of gallons of water filled with minerals up into the ocean, with all sorts of weird creatures living around their perimeter. But they're tens of thousands of feet deep. But there are springs shooting water from deep within the earth up into the ocean. Nobody could have known that. There is no way any human being could have been that deep back that long ago. And yet they knew this was a truth because God revealed it. It's those ways God makes sure we know this is his word. And then just a couple more. This one's kind of cool. It talks about the constellations. It says, "Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion?" Now, those are two different constellations. There's been 12 constellations, by the way, that show up in all of the ancient cultures. The Chinese have the same constellations. The Middle Easterns have the same constellations. The Europeans had the same constellations. The Africans had the same constellations. Because they all came from Noah and his sons. And these things were likely acknowledged by the men before the flood. So as they spread out, they all knew what they were called. I mean, Orion doesn't look like a hunter. They got that from some insight from God and early humanity. It was revealed to them. But Pleiades has stars that are gravitationally bound. Now, you can't see that without incredibly and powerful telescopes. Over time, those stars in that constellation do not move apart. They're forced. They're locked into position. On the other hand, the belt, the bands of Orion, those stars are moving apart with time. And it's fast enough we can actually see it happening in a matter of months and years. But they're moving apart away from us. Now imagine there's two things here, and you're looking toward them, and they're moving apart, but they're almost in line with each other. You really can't see that movement. Whereas here you can see the movement. Because they're in line with it, you can't really see the movement. So you can't really tell they're moving apart until, again, this was discovered in 1977, that the stars of Orion are moving apart. So those bands, the stars that form the belt of Orion, are loose. They've been loose to move apart. So one constellation is not moving, the other one is. The stars are spreading. But we can't see it. Isn't that interesting? And yet there it is in God's Word. And then the very last one, this is the only book of the Bible that repeatedly mentions snow. I mean, I think I forgot to Google this. I meant to do this before this talk tonight. And just go to a Bible search engine and Google snow and see how often it comes up. The only other one I absolutely know of is in Isaiah, where it says, "Though your sins be as red as scarlet, I will make them white as snow." But in Job, it's mentioned 4 times. 4 times as much as any other book of the Bible. "Hast thou entered the treasures of snow, or seen the treasures of hail?" Why? Because immediately following the flood of Noah, there was enormous volcanism during the flood. There was massive land movement during the flood. And all of that stuff, the earth cracked open with the lava pouring out into the oceans. All of the oceans of the world would have been, at the end of that 1-year period, much, much warmer than today. The average water temperature in the oceans today is around 38 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, on average. It's very, very cold. I mean, just a few degrees above freezing. I suspect, and people that have studied it believe, that after the flood, the average water temperature was probably in the 70 to 90 degree range. Oceans are enormous. And by the way, we know that because up in the Arctic region, we find enormous forests filled with trees that only grow in the tropics. Hundreds of year-old trees in Antarctica that have grown there. Now, why? Because even in the Bering Sea and the oceans down below by Antarctica, there would have been warm water. And because water holds so much heat, it would take hundreds and hundreds of years to cool down to a new equilibrium. Well, how does water cool down? By evaporating. So you had massive evaporation after the flood, which means massive cloud cover of the entire earth, which means sunlight's just being reflected away. Guaranteed ice age. So it would have snowed and snowed and snowed in the north and south latitudes of the world. the Middle East, the equator would have remained warm, but they would have been aware of this building ice all around them. And it got mentioned because this was going on right after the flood for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, we think it lasted somewhere in the 800, maybe 1,000-year range, and then started, once the evaporation slowed down and the skies cleared, and all those glaciers, some of them 2 miles thick. By the way, it takes 10 feet of snow to make 1 foot of ice. So you would have had 20 miles of snow. Think of that snowfall over a few hundred years. And it built up weight and shoved down and carved out the Great Lakes and covered areas all the way down here into Wisconsin and clear down to Kentucky, building up enormous ice sheets. But then those melted away, causing massive floods that carved out the Columbia River Valley and flowed back into the ocean. The ocean levels dropped 200 to 300 feet, and then over a few hundred years rose back up 200 to 300 feet. So these are the kind of things that were going on during the time of Job. So snow came up repeatedly. It all fits a biblical worldview when you understand the flood. But the greatest thing isn't the scientific insights. It's the spiritual insights that Job went through. And I love, this is one of my favorite verses of Scripture. In the midst of all this tragedy and agony and pain, in the midst of being told he can lie and just accept the blame for his situation, and his works would bring him relief, he makes this statement. This statement. Right here. I know that my Redeemer liveth, and he shall in the latter days stand upon the earth. How could he have known that? That's his hope. That there is someone who will redeem mankind from all their pain. And he's in the worst pain of any human ever. So here's the end of the story. Does God come and tell Job why he's in all this pain? Never answers that question. For 36 chapters, Job is begging God, just tell me why this is happening. Just reveal to me why me. That's his cry. That's his plea. But God doesn't do that. God comes in chapter 38, chapter 39, chapter 40, chapter 41 for 4 chapters and basically talks about creation. Look at what I've made. Look at what I've created. Look at what I've done. Have you been there? Do you have the knowledge? Do you have the understanding? And at the end of this long monologue by God, this is Job's response, or the question. This is typical of the beginning of that monologue. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare it if you have understanding. Who laid the measures of the entire universe? And I'm kind of adding to the implications of what's being said. If thou knowest. Who stretched out a line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations fastened? Who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Asking Job, you really think that you deserve to know and understand everything that I've done? You really think so? And at the end of it all, Job understood for the first time the depth of his sin, being the most righteous man upon earth. He was called the greatest of all. God pointed him out as the human who was the epitome of loving and following God. And yet Job realized the epitome of a human being, a fallen human being compared to God, isn't even like dust and ashes. He said, I know thou can do everything, and that no thought can be withheld from thee. Therefore, what I've uttered I've not understood. Things too wonderful for me, things I knew not. I've heard of thee by the hearing of the ear. Now listen to this verse. Job had heard of the things of God. I think there were documents that came from Adam to his sons all the way to Noah, were passed down, and knowledges and insights that built the Egyptian culture and the Chinese culture and marvels of the ancient world were from those hundreds of years people lived before the flood, and knowledge of God that came from walking with God in the Garden of Eden. Job had heard of these things, but now he said, my eye has seen thee. Now, God just gave a 4-chapter monologue to Job. Did Job literally see God himself? No. But what did God tell Job to look at? The things that he had made. In Romans, it said, by looking at what God has made, we can know the very character and nature and power of God. By looking at what he's made. Job says, by having been described what God has done, he's now seen God. See the parallel? And when Job compares himself in his acts, in his righteousness, with all that God has done, and really understanding the power and character and nature of God, he falls into repentance and compares himself dust and ashes. Now, there's the key, and I'm going to come back to it at the end. When we are doing a pity party on ourselves because of what we're going through, and life is tough, and we do have problems, and times things do seem hopeless, the solution isn't to dwell on it, it's to get the focus off ourselves and get it back on the one who made it all and died for our sins. That's the most important message tonight. And the easiest way to do that is honestly to regain that awe of who God is and be part of it. An important part of it is to remember and look at those things he made. And the damage of the world we live in is that the whole world, education system of the Western world, the media, the museums, the textbooks, the professors, the scientists, the teachers, they're working 24 hours a day with billions of dollars to train that awe out of us by pretending it all made itself. And it's not true. It couldn't be true. Now let me show you how I know that. I have to jump past this, and now we're going to get into the awe of God. And I just have 8 examples. Now I'm good. I'm going to wrap up in the next half hour, but these are just fun. And these are all pages from those devotionals, okay? And I'll share another resource at the very end. We're going to start with June 7th of Have You Considered? And it talks about the Marine Iguana, okay? Now, it's kind of an ugly critter. He's about this long, okay? Pretty big lizard. And he lives in the Galapagos Islands and that general area. He's a very specific species. But he has to get his food out of the ocean, okay? Now, there's a problem. The little islands he lives on are surrounded by sharks because they get lots of good food to eat in this very fertile area of the South Pacific. And when the iguana goes into the water, he's got this really big heart. I mean, he's a big lizard with a big heart. And when he swims in the water, his heart's going boom, 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 boom. And it doesn't sound like the waves in the ocean and the fish swimming. It's very, very distinct. Sharks have lousy eyesight, but really, really good hearing. So they can just zero in on that like sonar. They'll hear it, and they'll go grab that iguana, and it's like a hot dog. Just a yummy hot dog, just a crunch, and he's gone. And give me another one. So George and his brother Frank are sitting there one day on the side of the shore, and Frank goes in and goes swimming to get some fish, and a shark comes and goes whomp. And George is thinking, oh man, there goes Frank. What am I going to do? And he has an idea. You know what? I bet that shark can hear my brother's heartbeat. If I could just turn off my heart, he wouldn't hear me, and then I could eat. So that's exactly what iguanas do. He goes in the water, shuts down his heart, and he swims around for 20 minutes with no heartbeat. Shuts down his heart. Now think about this, okay? Grabs some fish, chomps them down, grabs another fish, checking his watch, saying, oh, it's been 19 minutes, I better head back out. Crawls back up on the seashore. How do we evolve the ability to start my heart? You see, it would take thousands of programming changes into the DNA of that creature to allow it to shut down its heart. It has to change its respiratory system. It has to change its metabolism. It has to change its ability to use oxygen to feed its muscles. It has to have reserve systems going on. There's no other animal on Earth that can do this. At will, let's at the same moment. It's changed thousands of programming changes to its DNA, added chemicals that have no purpose unless it can restart its heart. It has to be able to restart its heart. And unless it's all there, dead iguana. You see, it's literally absurd to believe this all happened by random chance. God does these things to leave us in awe of his ability to create phenomenal, miraculous abilities of animals. And then he tells us to go study creation so we'll understand who made it all. Because it couldn't have made itself. That couldn't just happen by accident. So that's just one fun example. Now here's my favorite bird. It's the Bar Tailed Godwit. Now, I think I like it because it's not called the Bar Tailed Evolution Wit. It's the Godwit. Okay, well, I don't know. I think it was named that before they discovered what this bird does. But you'll notice it's on these long, spindly, stocky legs. It runs along the seashore and it grabs little seashells with its long beak. But the Godwit, it loves to spend its summers in Alaska. Because in Alaska, in the summer, there's a bloom of microorganisms, and it draws in the fish, and it draws in the whales, and it draws in the birds, and it's just a plethora of a biological smorgasbord. And it just eats a lot. But it gets cold in Alaska in the winter, and the Godwit doesn't particularly like cold weather. So it flies all the way to New Zealand in September before it gets really cold. Now that's a 7,000-mile journey. And it turns out the Godwit can't swim. If it lands, it drowns. And it can't really take off. It's not built like waterfowl with these great big wings that can flap them and take off out of water. If it lands, it drowns. So it has to fly between 5 and 7 days, depending on prevailing winds, 24 hours a day, never stopping to flap its wings. It's got to continuously flap its wings. Now, biologists can calculate how many calories does it take each time it shoves those wings down and pulls them back up. And it can calculate how many calories do you get out of a gram of fat. And they discovered there is no possibility for this bird to fly that far. It's a scientific impossibility. It can't have enough fat. It's not big enough. But it does. So this is why science is kind of fun. How does it do it? Because it obviously does. It's not an impossibility. What's going on here? Well, it turns out that for several weeks before it takes off, it just gorges itself. It's a smorgasbord, okay? It eats and eats. It gains 55% of its weight. I mean, if you weigh 200 pounds, that means you're weighing like 320 pounds, okay? But now the Godwit looks like the Goodyear blimp. It's going to flap its wings, terribly non-aerodynamic, and it still can't get that far because it's so big and heavy and clumsy and fat. So it still doesn't work, even though now it has a lot more fat. So right near the end of those 2 weeks of gorging, it somehow removes all the water from the fat. So it becomes like a real concentrated taros kind of stuff. And it's not really a liquid, oozy fat. It's just like suet, okay? But it's still too big. It's still too fat to get that far. So right at the end, before it takes off, it shrivels up its internal organs. Its liver, its kidney, its stomach, its intestines, its everything just shrivels up, and all that fat takes the place of where the organs used to be. Now, biologists don't think there's any other bird that can really do this. It's like unique. It's just all of a sudden this bird has this ability. How does it know where to find New Zealand? 7,000-mile journey. How does it know it's supposed to fly there? The parents have already left. The babies leave later, the young ones that are born in Alaska. How does it know to shrivel up its organs? How does it know to make this special kind of fat? If it couldn't do any of this, the first one to try it would have died, and there wouldn't have been another one to try it afterwards. You see, again, with creation, there are millions of these examples of features where all the features, all these abilities have to be there all at once, in place, or nothing works and the animal dies. It's how we know it was created. We have to think, well, maybe it evolved, maybe it doesn't. How do I know the difference? We can know by looking at these animals, they were created to do these things. Oh, love this one. Okay, we'll get to a few fish. The Japanese pufferfish is the Michelangelo of fish because he was a sculptor above all other things. This fish sculpts at the bottom of the ocean something no other fish can sculpt. And by the way, one of my videos, lesson 10, I had the honor of we had a conference of Bible-believing scientists, mostly PhDs. There were anesthesiologists, there were earth geophysicists, there were NASA scientists, there were geologists, there were biologists, geneticists, all of them, and they were giving lectures on their stuff. And I took a film crew, and I just spent 10 minutes to 20 minutes with each of them and asked them, in your area of study, what's the greatest evidence that supports creation, and what's the biggest problem with evolution? And one of them, he's an anesthesiologist from La Paloma University, head of that department, he gave me a surprising answer, and you'll hear that answer at the very beginning.
I would cite that the most original aspect of creation that has impressed me is the reality that in the natural sphere there is beauty in the physical domain, and beauty makes no contribution to fitness or to survival. So in one area, Darwinian evolution collapses.
Unfortunately, this small Japanese pufferfish is dull, almost to the point of invisibility. But to compensate, he is probably nature's greatest artist. To grab a female's attention, he creates something that almost defies belief. His only tools are his fins. In his head, a plan of mathematical perfection. He plows the sand, breaking it up into the finest of particles. These shells aren't just rubbish to be removed. He uses them to decorate the bridges of his construction. He can't rest for more than a moment, but must work 24 hours a day for a week, or the current will destroy his creation. A final tidy up, and his masterpiece is complete. Nowhere else in nature does an animal construct something as complex and perfect as this.
If this doesn't get him noticed, nothing will.
Okay. Nowhere else in nature does any other animal construct something so perfectly circular, so complex. Now, I mean, if that doesn't bring some awe of God, it should. You're leaving it out. Now, the narrator was David Attenborough. He created this whole series of nature films. And at the end, his job is to destroy our awe of what God has just done by giving it some naturalistic explanation. Oh, this fish just probably created little mounds, and then he created prettier mounds and bigger mounds, and eventually he made this really pretty circle so he can attract a babe. And therefore that explains it. Because he made it really pretty, a girl will come and mate with him. How does he know that? How does he know just a little mound wouldn't do the same thing? How does he know they wouldn't mate regardless, that it gives any sort of advantage? It's all storytelling. You see, we couldn't even do what that fish does. It has to shove sand around with its head 24 hours a day, nonstop, or else the current destroys it for 7 days. And that circle, that fish is about 6 inches. If it's as big as us, it's trying to create a circle from here all the way up to the other end of the parking lot that's perfectly circular. It never swims up to even look at what it's doing. We couldn't even do what that fish does. But it does it because it has a plan. It's been programmed to do this by God. So the awe goes to God. But man gives the awe to, oh, it's a natural process of trying to attract a girl. Now that's been used to try to explain beauty for ever since Darwin proposed it 160 years ago. They say flowers are so beautiful so they'll attract insects. Insects are colorblind. It's nonsense. That's not why the beauty is there. Or here's a statement by Charles Darwin. He said, the sight of a feather in a peacock, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. What? Why would a human being have that response to such beauty? Because he couldn't explain it. And the next group of people that came along said, oh, well, it's just that beautiful because the male, the prettier it is, the better it's able to attract a female. And therefore, that's how evolution created beauty. And you'll hear it over and over and over and over and over again, repeated until it becomes a fact in people's minds. Well, guess what? About a couple dozen years ago, they tested it. They took some male peacocks and they cut off all those beautiful eye-shaped feathers. So this peacock was pug ugly. Just ugly. Just a bunch of stalks sticking out. And then they had a bunch of pretty peacocks and they sent them all in a field together with a bunch of females to see who will the female pick. Didn't make a bit of difference. The beauty didn't make a bit of difference. Had nothing to do with mating. The beauty's there to reflect the nature of the one who made it. Amen. And everything else is storytelling that can be proven to be wrong. Evolution can't explain beauty. How smart is a honeybee? Princeton University researchers want to figure it out. I mean, they're little bees, they have a brain the size of a grain of sand, okay? About 1 million neutrons. Our brain has about 100 million neutrons, so millions times bigger. So how smart are these little critters? Well, what they did to figure it out, they put up a set of hives and kept them in the hives and then released them with a stopwatch. And they had put a really rich source of nectar, and I believe it was 150 feet away. Well, it turns out honeybees are pretty smart. The first bee found the nectar, flew back to the hive, and bees communicate in a very ingenious way. A bee that finds a rich source of food, it'll come into the hive, and it'll take its butt, and it'll wiggle its butt like this. And then it'll form this little dance, and it'll go around in circles. And all the other bees gather around and watch it. And in this dance, it dances in a very specific angle to the honeycombs, the direction they're lined up, and they know to fly out that exact same angle to find the food. And the number of times it goes around in the circle tells them how far to fly. So this one honeybee tells all the other bees what direction and how far to go. And it took them about 20 minutes for a whole bunch of bees to show up at that food. And they had marked the bees so they knew it came from the same hive. It wasn't just a random thing. Now, Here's the first question. The first bee that comes back to the hive and starts wiggling his butt, how do the other bees know what it's telling them? They're watching him and saying, Frank's having an epileptic fit. They're not going to know what it's trying to tell them. They're not going to have a clue. How does that happen? They all have to know to begin with. God programmed them to be able to communicate. It's the most logical explanation. So then the researchers moved the food in the same direction 300 feet away, thinking, well, maybe it'll take them twice as long. This was their first surprise. Now, they used a different set of bees, repeated the experiment. They flew back. Oh, I'm sorry. It was the same set of bees. Collected them, opened them up. They went out. 20 minutes later, they had found the food. They did it a third time, 450 feet away. Same result. Distance didn't seem to make a difference. Within 20 minutes, that bee had come back, found the food, told the other bees, and they were there. Then they moved it a fourth time, so it's 600 feet away. The bees were all buzzing around waiting for them to show up with the food. Those bees had calculated what had happened 3 times, the direction the food was moved, the distance the food was moved. They waited outside of the hive and went to the location and waited for the food to show up. The bees, with their grain of sand brain, had outsmarted the Princeton researchers. Isn't that just cool? What God is capable of is stunning. Now, here's one of my favorites, a little sea creature called the Sea Sapphire. Now, I got to admit it, that's probably my sinful nature, but I grew up in the 60s and 70s with comic books, and I love the superhero movies. You know, the whole Avengers things, and Spider-Man's my favorite, and so on. But one of those things I've always wanted was invisibility. I thought, oh, it'd be so cool to be invisible. I could go places and just listen in. It'd be so much fun. Well, it turns out Marvel didn't create invisibility. God did. Watch this. This little sea sapphire, it's about 1/2 inch long, okay? And it's this brilliant sapphire blue color. And it's blue because when light comes down and hits it, those little scales are like little butterfly scales its body's made out of. They're translucent, so the light can pass right through them. It absorbs all the light except for blue, the wavelength of blue, and that bounces back. So that's what we see, is this blue color. But when that little creature is head on, the blue comes, it hits it, it goes through one scale to the next scale, and it bounces back. When it turns, the distance between the scales changes. When you take something and turn it, 2 parallel plates, so they're like this, now it's a longer distance for the light to pass. The blue suddenly gets absorbed and none of the light bounces back. So now there's no light bouncing back. The creature's body is translucent. It's like a smoky window color. And light just goes right through, and you can see the ocean bottom below it. Watch the little video of this animal as it turns. Okay, so there it is, bright blue, and it turns, and it just became invisible. You can see the ocean right underneath of it. It's an invisible animal. God created invisibility. Isn't that cool? Wasn't Marvel Comics, it was God. All right, last 2 examples. The Oppo Fish. Now, this was just stunning. When I go overseas and talk to the students in the South Pacific, this is always the one example I use to help them understand the awe of God. This little fish, now, first of all, he's a superhero. Now, he's not big, he's not strong, he's not colorful, he's not even particularly pretty. He's got a black eye like someone punched him in the face. So why is he a superhero? Because of what he can do. You see, this fish lives only in one place. This particular species, he's a kind of fish called a goby, but he's a specific species called the Oppo fish. And he lives only off the island of Hawaii, the big island. And this fish lives in salt water, but he has to lay his eggs in fresh water. If he lays his eggs in the ocean, they die. There's no more generations. The fish goes extinct. It's the only place he lives, in the ocean off Hawaii. The only source of fresh water is at the top of this waterfall. Like out here is the ocean, If the fish lays its eggs here, the fresh water gets flushed into the ocean, the eggs die. He's got to lay the eggs in protected little areas up here at the top of the waterfall. It's a 420-foot waterfall. How is the fish going to get up a 400-foot waterfall that never stops flowing to lay its eggs? Parents? Whoa! We finally stumped the nerd of nerds. Well, I asked this to the South Pacific kids. I'll be in an assembly of 1,000 kids, and I'll always hear one of the kids yell out, "Maybe it flies." Well, there are flying fish. They've heard of flying fish, but they don't necessarily understand. Those are fins that just get stuck out, and the flying fish glides, and it can glide for like 50 or 100 feet. But it never gets higher than about 10 feet off of the waves. And it can't go 400 feet high. It can't flap wings. And another kid, they'll say, well, maybe it'll climb. And I'll say, well, kind of like Spider-Man? Oh, yeah, Spider-Man, going to climb up the wall. Well, that's a fantasy. That can't happen. And then I point out, well, there is another movie, and they're called, anybody recognize what this movie is from? Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Mission Impossible, where Ethan Hunt puts suction cup gloves on his hands and climbs up the 150-foot tall tower in Dubai. Well, it turns out that's exactly what this fish does. You see, God, not evolution, God created this fish with a suction cup under its body. And then that fish takes that suction cup and it sticks it to the wall and shoves with its fins. And sticks it and shoves and sticks it with its shoves. And it climbs 400 foot up the waterfall, jumps out, lays its eggs up there in a protected area until they grow into little fishlings, and then they're flushed back down into the ocean and they repeat the cycle. Now imagine one day there's 2 fish that don't have a suction cup and their baby's born with a suction cup. And the little fish says, "Mommy, Daddy, what do I do with this?" You think they're going to say, "I know what you do. You go stick yourself to that wall over there." Whoa! And now you shove up the wall. It's got to know what to do with the suction cup. And why would it do that if it didn't need to lay the eggs at the top of the waterfall? Why would it go through all that effort? And if it needed to lay the eggs at the top of the waterfall, how did it survive before it got the suction cup? You see, evolution has no answer to logical questions. It just assumes it's useful, therefore it evolved. They throw the word evolution at it and they say, oh, that explains it. It doesn't explain it at all. You have to explain how could the mechanisms actually do that. Okay, now I want to end up with this example and then a wrap-up little insect that drives my main point home. But I use this because it's a resource. I want to talk about sunflowers, okay? And this is what sunflowers look like. And by the way, I don't know if everybody realizes this, but in the morning, sunflowers are facing toward the sun in the east. All day they follow the sun as the earth rotates. And in the evening, sunflowers are facing to the west. Now, these aren't animals. They don't have radar tracking. How do they do that? How do they turn? About a year ago, I thought I'm going to take the pages of the devotional and I'm turning it into a little set of video devotionals. And I call it Without a Doubt. In other words, you can know God exists with absolutely no doubt in your mind by looking at the things God has made. So they're the Without a Doubt devotionals. And they're on my website. So my website's in front of all of your books. It's called searchforthetruth.net. I'm just going to go to that website and I'm going to show you one of these devotionals. And just click subscribe, and once a week on your email, you'll get a link to one of these. And they typically last about 2 minutes long. But share them with the people around you because they're that reminder of God's awe. So let me pull this up. So here's the home page of my website. The first thing you see when you go to searchforthetruth.net is the Without a Doubt devotionals. If you click Watch Now, it takes you to that YouTube page. If you play all, there's about 40 of them, and about 35 of them have now been published. And when those 40 get done, I'll probably make another 40. So just watch this little 2 minutes, and you notice they're a minute 35 seconds, a minute 10 seconds, a minute 10 seconds, a minute 49 seconds. Kind of watch these and think about how this can help you share the truth with friends and neighbors and family and so on.
At Great Big Campus, we believe everyone.
Let's see, I gotta skip the ad.
Should experience the power of art.
All right.
We curate art that is rooted in good design.
Okay.
Here's my field sunhawk. Gorgeous with their beautiful yellow heads. And yet, those heads track the sun. In the morning, they're facing east. All day they turn until in evening, they're facing west, tracking the sun. Why do they do that? How do they do that? Well, it turns out their stems have cells which grow faster on the east side during the day. Therefore, it stretches out that stalk and causes the head to turn all day long. But at night, the cells on the west side of the stalk catch up and they grow faster, causing the head to turn back around, so in the morning they're facing the sun. Now, botanists do strange things. They decided to torture these two plants by anchoring the head so it was forced to face east continually. Turns out, those plants had 5 times less seeds and biomatters when they didn't track the sun. But why are there 5 times less seeds and biomatter? Well, when they anchored those plants facing only east, during the day, it turns out there's 5 times more insects, bees, and pollinators that would come and pollinate those plants because they would warm up earlier in the morning. The sunflower doesn't have a brain. How does it know to grow part of its cells faster? How does it know there's going to be more pollinating insects if it turns its head back at night so in the morning it warms up quicker and it will get more insects visiting it? It can't. It has to be designed that way. And think of the hundreds or thousands of changes that would have to happen chemically and at a cellular level in order for the plant to just happen to have these abilities. It could never happen. It's designed by our God who wants this plant to grow and thrive.
So I wanted to show you that resource. Just go to my webpage, hit subscribe, and once a week you get one of these little reminders of the awe of God. And that's where we're going to end. Let me go back to the sunflower. You know, there's this thing we find throughout nature called bioluminescence. We see it on jellyfish, where they just glow this beautiful blue. We see it in plankton. It covers whole waves with glowing colors. In the forest, we'll see mushrooms that glow bright green. Squid, these actually have the ability to do a light show where they have like strobe lights running across their surface, creating patterns in beautiful colors with lights that turn on and off. There's this little anglerfish that lives 4,000 feet down in the ocean, and it has a stalk with a light bulb at the end of it that attracts other fish. This thing, oh, I'm dazzled by the light, whomp, and then they get eaten. It's like the creativity is stunning. And then there's this little bug with a bulb on its butt. God created a bug with a light bulb on its butt. How does that happen? And it can turn it on and off, it can flash it, it can do different species, it can leave it on for long periods of time, and it flies around at night with a light. Took decades to figure this out. Turns out there are 2 very complex biochemicals. They have to be kept separate, they have to be created very specifically, but all these different things, the mushrooms, the jellyfish, the plankton, the anglerfish, the lightning bug, they all have different chemicals that fall into this category, and they're called luciferine and luciferase. Now that's kind of interesting. Anybody notice the beginning of that word? Lucifer. Because Lucifer in the Bible is referred to as an angel of light. One who disguises himself as an angel of light. So they named the chemicals after something in the Bible. And it's only when they combine that they create the different colors and the different kinds of light. And evolutionists are forced to believe that bioluminescence evolved 40 different times and completely different kind of creatures all by accident. They can't even explain it once. And they just assume it happened 40 different times in completely different places and time periods throughout Earth history. It's nonsense. It's all been designed. You see, if God can create a bug with a light bulb on its butt, don't you think God can light your way through your problems? Doesn't that make sense? If he cares about the number of hairs on your head and every bird in the sky, don't you think he cares about you and your problems? See, we are children of the light, of the truth, of knowing the one who did it all. We're children of the day, not of the night and not of the darkness. See, you can't create darkness. You can't make things more dark. You can only withdraw the light. And the light in our country is being removed. The reason this lecture is so important is not because of a bunch of cute little fun animals. It's because we are facing increasing darkness. We no longer live in a Christian country. We are about to be facing persecution like never before in America. We've had this little 200-year reprieve, but persecution is the history of Christianity throughout cultures and the world. And it is coming. And when things get tough, and we are persecuted, and we are hurt, and we are in bad situations, are we going to turn our backs to the light and crawl into the darkness, or are we going to continue to focus on God and who he is and what he's done? That's the lesson of Job. For we are of the day to be sober and put on this breastplate of faith and love before the darkest, evilest times come, and put on the helmet. See, the breastplate protects our heart and our essence of our emotions and soul. The helmet protects our head, which is our thinking. We've got to protect both our faith and our beliefs, and the hope of salvation, and put our hope in Jesus Christ alone. Don't be conformed and fooled and led astray by the darkness this world is falling into, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. How do you renew your mind? With God's word, with how we think. How we think leads to what we believe. And then we'll know the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was helpful as you think about it in the future.